Shazam!
I was pretty excited for Shazam! Fury of the Gods, especially after feeling generally positive about the first film. I thought the cast was great, and it had been a few years since we revisited the Shazam area of this universe. I left the film generally disappointed. The film definitely had higher stakes than the first, but the characters didn't have much of an arc to go through. And you could tell, while visually the scope of the film was much larger, the budget didn't match that since it generally didn't look that good. We also had a lot more moments in the film that felt like they were hoping to meme, and it just didn't work very well. Much like the first film and Wonder Woman 1984, not much really happened during the production of the film. It was revealed a lot of the creative team from the first movie was set to return. Production obviously took a few years, in part due to the COVID-19 lockdowns, slowing production down a bit, but there isn't really all that interesting to talk about when it comes to the production of Shazam! Fury of the Gods. The story follows a more established Shazam family, with the Shazam family being the saviors of Philadelphia when a new evil appears. A group of mysterious gods steal the wizard Shazam's staff, which was in a museum in Athens following Billy snapping it in half during the climax of the previous film. Despite having seemingly died during the previous film, the wizard was indeed alive and forced to re-merge the staff by the three daughters of Atlas. Meanwhile, despite the family seemingly working in tandem, each member is starting to long to have something different to do with their own lives as people and as superheroes, which Billy tries to prevent, fearing he would lose his family if they all had their own separate lives, and he would again be alone, especially given the fact that he was quickly approaching the age of 18, thus aging out of the foster system, which would lead him to losing his family in his eyes. Freddy, meanwhile, despite being bullied, meets Anne, a new girl he starts to form a bond with, but the gang quickly learns she is one of the sisters of Atlas, and she wasn't really Anne, but actually Athena. Freddy would be captured by the sisters and imprisoned, where he meets the wizard, who turns out to be very much alive, despite what he and his family had previously thought. The sisters want a magical golden apple, which could lead them to recrafting the world of the gods, which it just so happens is in the Shazam realm lair the family have access to. After a skirmish with the sisters, the Shazam family think they captured the eldest, Hespera, but it was a trap so she could claim the apple. Freddy and the wizard escape captivity with help of Athena, but are quickly noticed. However, right then, the Shazam family shows up to intervene, having found the path Hespera took from her realm. Freddy gets his powers back and they manage to escape, but the Shazam family's parents find out. Calypso, one of the sisters, shows up to the city and manages to depower the family, with the exception of Billy. And Calypso manages to plant the apple, causing a legion of monsters to take over the city. Billy manages to fight off Calypso with the help of his family and Athena and Hespera, who realize their sister has gone too far in trying to reclaim their world, but Hespera is killed during the scuffle. Billy fights Calypso and her dragon and manages to stop the apple from terraforming the earth, but it costs him his life. However, with the help of Wonder Woman, the wizard undoes the damage done, and nothing of consequence really happened aside from Hespera dying, with everyone getting their powers back and Billy revived in a more flaccid death than even Superman's from Batman v Superman. Athena and the wizard also go back to Earth, and the 6,000-year-old goddess starts dating 17-year-old Freddy. The characters of this film all kind of fall flat and fail to really go through arcs on the level of the first film. Billy slides back a bit, and rather than feeling abandoned, now worries about losing the family he's built over the last 3 years. With the last 3 years, the family seemingly, has not assured him of his role in the family. Billy wants to hold together his new family too much and hinders their lives. At the end, his foster parents say they love him, and so does the rest of the family. He does sacrifice himself, proving he had found himself as a true hero or something, but of course he isn't dead for very long. They tried to do an arc with Billy, but it just feels half-baked. I think the main issue is it seems like between the end of the last film and the start of this film, Billy hasn't progressed much as a character, with him being basically in the same place he was at the end of that movie. We also have a Captain Marvel that is even more cartoony than before, with David F. Sandberg never really trying to keep a consistency between the two performances. Freddy is looking to be more independent and grow up a bit, even starting a relationship with a 6,023-year-old woman, which is fucking wild that that's in this movie, honestly. But she looks like a teenager, so who cares, I suppose. Freddy, by the end, gains some more independence because Billy learns his lesson. He also is brave or something for going after the apple after breaking free from prison, but I don't know. This whole arc's a bit hollow, and I didn't really care for it. Mary also wants independence, but once again, this really only happens for her because of Billy's arc, so I guess she didn't really go through anything that important. Athena falls deeply in love with Freddy, who is 6,006 years her junior, to the point that she betrays her sisters and their goals. The sisters that she's known for over 6,000 years and shared goals with. Otherwise, she has no real character. I think one of the big problems with this huge ensemble cast is that the production team never really found anything interesting to say about any of the characters, unlike the first film, which focuses heavily on Billy, Freddy, and Dr. Silva, and had arcs for each, even mirroring the arcs of Billy and Silva. Here, they never really had anything solid to do with any of them, so instead they just did nothing with any of the characters, and the movie kind of just happens. The cinematography is pretty okay again, more Marvel House style than most, with the film being shot by Gyula Pados, cinematographer for such films as Predators, Maze Runner, The Scorched Isles, Jumanji: The Next Level, and the new Planet of the Apes movies. His style is very Marvel Studio House style-esque, and studios have hired him to create that same look in their films, despite him never having actually worked on a Marvel film, surprisingly. That's kind of his niche. The tone of this film is confused. At times it's a comedy, or supposed to be, like when Darla, the youngest sister of the Shazam family, feeds a unicorn Skittles to tame it and yells, "Taste the rainbow." Taste the rainbow, motherfucker! Which is next level obnoxious product placement on par with Paul Rudd eating Stay Puft Marshmallow Men at Walmart during Ghostbusters Afterlife. And much of the family, like Billy and Freddy, acting like men coming of age at points, but with their superhero counterparts still acting like young teens from the first film, I think is a little confusing. A major challenge to bringing the Marvel family to life is the fact that in real life, kids and teens grow up very quick, especially when put up against a film cycle for superhero films. While Marvel and DC will make a couple films a year, most franchises only get an entry every few years due to the amount of projects they're juggling. If there's 4 years between Shazam films, and Shazam is 14 in the first film, by the time the second entry hits, they're now 18, then 22, and so on. With COVID, the production was slightly slow, granted, but with things like this, it's hard to do a film every 2 years, which would have been a tad more sensible for this plot and type of character. Plus, Grace Carey now plays Mary, her superhero form, which adds a level of weirdness since they didn't call back the former Super Mary, Michelle Broth. When does that change happen? When they turn 18? Is that when they just become their superhero identities? There are comics where Billy is an adult and doesn't change bodies like he does early on, which I think is a better way to do something like this for a long-term story, but that can cost you the gimmick that is the pull of the story in the first place, that you have a superhero kid who turns into a superhero man. Plus, you also have the issue of Asher Angel and Zachary Levi playing two totally different Billy Batsons. It kind of worked in the first one. They could kind of get away with it there, I guess. But here, it's super noticeable that the two are very different people, and I often disconnect the two characters from each other while watching the film, only to be reminded, oh, these are the same people, right. This isn't a problem in the comics, where Billy can be a kid for decades, and you have one writer kind of just making the character write the same, and the artist draws them two different ways. But with actors, you have to train a child actor and an adult actor to act the same while playing the same character, and it's just really hard to do. I also don't think Asher Angel and Zachary Levi really have similar screen personalities or presence, which would probably help better. Zachary Levi seems very silly. Asher Angel seems to take himself a lot more seriously, which I think is needed for his Billy Batson, so I think it's more on Levi. who just can't really match Asher Angel's performance. If Warner Brothers wants to redo this franchise in the future, they'll have to have a trilogy planned and shoot back-to-back all of the Harry Potter films or something, like one a year, and probably start by casting people that are 10 or 12 rather than 14 or 15, because this sequel feels something like a third or fourth entry in the series, not the second, and that also kind of gives it a tired feeling, like we've had so many adventures with these characters, when in reality we have seen them once before. The only character that was adapted from the comics for this movie that wasn't in the previous video is Athena, and she was adapted from the character from Greek mythology. In the comics, she's mostly known for her attachment to Wonder Woman, and first appeared in DC Comics in All-Star Comics number 8. She's the only non-original character added to this film, which I suppose is somewhat refreshing despite Shazam having other untapped villains. Black Adam.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
Christopher Beck does the score here, and he's worked on the Frozen and Ant-Man series. Though Frozen has some bangers, I'll admit, Ant-Man lacks any memorable music, and so does this film, honestly. Michelle Allard edited this one again, and she did a decent job again, stringing together nice fight scenes and making the film pretty consistent, but I don't know. What else did she really do that I can talk about beyond the first film? It's very similar in terms of editing, and it's done well, so no hate on her. In the end credits scene, we see Shazam meet with Amelia Hardcourt and Economos, who offer him a role in the Justice Society, which he chastises the name for, thinking it's confusingly close to the Justice League.
Welcome to the Justice Society.
Yeah, awesome. Wait, what? The Justice Society? Is that different than the Justice League?
Yes, the Justice Society is different than the Justice League.
This was kind of cute, but since the Shazam franchise doesn't seem to be pulling over as far as I know, this likely won't go anywhere. The other one was Dr. Savannah talking to Mr. Minds, complaining their evil plan hasn't yet gone anywhere since being teased at the end of the previous film. That was pretty funny, compounded by the fact that it'll likely never be completed will make this even funnier.
It's been 2 goddamn years!
Yes, but what is time but a trick of the mind, a meaningless measure?
At least knowing that they made a dead-end plot line and making a joke out of it is kind of hilarious, honestly. I like that. In conclusion, this film was disappointing to say the least. The franchise feels tired, and yet this is only the second entry, with the first feeling pretty fresh. After working on it for a number of years, the team simply failed to find a new plot for us to sink our teeth into. The humor isn't good, and to be frank, is a bit overbearing, especially given the fact that the first film had pretty solid humor throughout. And with really weak character arcs and a shocking lack of action, with the action that is here being fairly lackluster, the film's also a little more boring than anything, with no real substance to latch onto. The only scene I really liked was when Billy is told by his foster parents they'll always be family. That was kind of a sweet conclusion to his arc, despite his arc being a little weak to me. And while the characters maintained some charm from the first film, it just wasn't carrying the film, and they're too inconsistent for me to really feel much for them. Lucy Liu was a sight for sore eyes. We love Lucy Liu out here, but the three sisters were kind of a lame set of villains, honestly. This film is definitely part of the DCEU's and perhaps the superhero genre post-COVID's death cry, with Disney and Warner Bros. Helming two major superhero universes that both seem to be running low on ideas, and partially leading to the fresh reboot James Gunn is helming. James Gunn, for his part, also had to promote the last few DCEU films since he took charge of DC Studios, leading to some confusion of what would stay and what would go, which I think at the time he may have even been unsure about, or at the very least he had to make something of these last few releases. But based on recent interviews with the cast of this film, it seems James Gunn has parted ways with the Shazam family, and so has director Dave F. Sandberg, who said he wants to head out of the superhero genre altogether back to horror, with this film becoming another example of how tired the superhero genre is becoming for audiences and perhaps filmmakers. Shazam Fury of the Gods costed $125 million to make and only made $134 million in return. Definitely losing money when you factor in marketing and being labeled a box office bomb. It was the third lowest gross for a DC movie, only beating out Wonder Woman 84 and The Suicide Squad. However, those dropped day and date on HBO Max and had their box office affected by early COVID, which wasn't really as big of a problem when Shazam Fury of the Gods came out. It's hard to say why the first Shazam was so successful while the second failed to connect, but it may have to do with the critical consensus on the project, with the film earning a mostly negative 49% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 47 out of 100 on Metacritic. Critics lambasted the movie for being basically a by-the-numbers sequel that had a handful of fun and touching moments mixed in with a bunch of superhero drool. I think superhero fatigue is an easily trackable trend based on box office pulls that have been coming out of Marvel and DC recently, and it seems only genuinely great films and popular characters are surviving this change in the genre. Shazam, while fun and critically acclaimed upon release, clearly didn't hold enough punching weight in the public consciousness to actually bring people back for the second installment. It's also worth noting the first film came out at the peak of the genre, around the time of Endgame and larger superhero films, giving people superhero fever. It was kind of the rise before the fall, so to speak. The film was not nominated for any notable awards, just 2 noms for the Golden Trailer Awards, which, you know, that's not really saying much.